The first thing I noticed about our new apartment in Chicago was how the afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of warmth across the hardwood floors. The second thing I noticed was how thin the walls were. Standing in what would become our bedroom, I could hear the muffled bass of music from next door, the occasional creak of floorboards as someone moved about. "Isn't it perfect, Eric?" Melissa's voice echoed slightly in the empty room as she wrapped her arms around me from behind. Our fresh start. I turned to face her, taking in the excitement in her dark eyes, the flush in her cheeks. After 5 years of marriage and a cramped one-bedroom in the suburbs, this spacious two-bedroom in downtown Chicago felt like an achievement, a symbol of our upward trajectory. "It's everything we wanted," I agreed, kissing her forehead. The scent of her vanilla perfume, the same one she'd worn since we met at Northwestern, enveloped me in familiarity even as we stood in this new space. "My name is Eric Taylor. I'm 34 years old, a software engineer at a growing tech company. Melissa works as a project coordinator at a marketing firm downtown, the job that had necessitated our move to be closer to her office. The relocation had been her idea, but I'd agreed readily enough. The commute had been wearing on her, and I could work from home several days a week. The first month passed in a blur of unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling into new routines. I set up my home office in the second bedroom, while Melissa transformed the living room into a space that reflected her aesthetic, minimalist but warm, with plants on every windowsill and art prints we'd collected over the years. It was in the second month that I first noticed the change. Subtle at first, Melissa staying at the office later, her texts becoming briefer, more functional. Working late, don't wait up. When she'd come home, sometimes after 10, she'd be tired but strangely energized. Her cheeks flushed, eyes bright in a way that didn't match her claims of exhaustion. "Another late meeting?" I asked one evening as she kicked off her heels by the door. She nodded, running a hand through her hair. "The Wilson campaign is a nightmare. The client keeps changing the requirements." I nodded, accepting her explanation, even as I noticed how she avoided my eyes, how she headed straight for the shower rather than collapsing on the couch beside me as she used to do after a long day. These late nights became more frequent. Twice, sometimes 3 times a week, I'd eat dinner alone, the sounds from the neighboring apartment providing an odd companionship. Jazz music, the occasional phone conversation in a deep male voice, the routine noises of someone else's life separated from mine by mere centimeters of drywall. I'd never met our neighbor, though I'd glimpsed him once in the hallway. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his early 40s. We'd nodded politely to each other but never exchanged words. One evening, I decided to surprise Melissa. I'd cook her favorite meal, pasta carbonara with fresh basil, and perhaps we could reconnect over dinner and wine. The distance between us had been growing, a subtle shift I couldn't quite name, but felt acutely in the silences that had replaced our once easy conversations. I left work early, stopping at the market for ingredients. As I chopped garlic in our kitchen, the sharp scent bringing tears to my eyes, I heard our neighbor return home, the familiar sound of his door opening and closing, followed by jazz music. Miles Davis, I thought, though I couldn't be certain. I was stirring the sauce when my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Working late again. Don't wait up for dinner. Sorry." Disappointment settled in my chest as I stared at the message. I texted back, "No problem. I'll save you a plate." I ate alone at our dining table, the carbonara flavorless despite my careful preparation. After dinner, I settled on the couch with my laptop, trying to focus on work, but finding my mind wandering, circling around questions I didn't want to acknowledge. Around 9, I heard a second door open and close next door, followed by muffled voices, his deep tone joined by another, lighter, feminine. I thought nothing of it. Neighbors have guests. Life goes on behind closed doors throughout the building. I returned to my work, losing myself in code until my concentration was broken by a sound I couldn't immediately identify. I paused, listening. There it was again, a soft thump against the wall that separated our bedroom from the neighbor's apartment, followed by what sounded like laughter, a woman's laughter. Something about that laugh sent a chill down my spine. It was familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I moved to our bedroom, drawn by an instinct I didn't want to name. The sounds were clearer here. Conversation, more laughter, the clink of glasses. I couldn't make out words, just tones, cadences. But that laugh, I stood frozen, straining to hear, telling myself I was being ridiculous. There were thousands of women in the city with similar laughs. It couldn't be. Wouldn't be. Then the laughter stopped, replaced by other sounds. Unmistakable sounds. The rhythmic creak of furniture. Soft moans. Whispered words of encouragement. My hand trembled as I backed away from the wall. The bedroom suddenly too small, too warm. I returned to the living room, mechanically closing my laptop, my mind racing through possibilities, explanations, coincidences that could make sense of what I'd heard without shattering my understanding of my marriage. At 10:30, I heard the neighbor's door open and close again. One set of footsteps retreated down the hallway toward the elevator. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Heading home now. See you soon. I sat in our darkened living room, the city lights through the windows casting long shadows across the floor. When the door finally opened, Melissa stepped in, freezing when she saw me sitting there. Eric, why are you sitting in the dark? I reached over and turned on the lamp, illuminating her startled face. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, deep burgundy, more fitted than her usual work attire. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, her hair not as perfectly arranged as it had been that morning. How was work? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Exhausting, she sighed, setting down her purse. The client rejected our initial designs, so we had to start from scratch. I nodded, watching as she moved toward the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, her back to me. So practiced, so smooth. How long had she been lying like this? I heard some interesting sounds tonight, I said, the words dropping into the quiet apartment like stones. Her hand paused, water glass halfway to her lips. Oh, through the wall, I continued. From next door. She turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. What kind of sounds? I think you know exactly what kind of sounds, Melissa. Her face remained composed, but I saw the slight widening of her eyes, the tightening of her fingers around the glass. I don't know what you're talking about. The walls are thin, I said simply. And you weren't at work this evening. She set the glass down carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Eric, don't, I interrupted, standing up. Don't lie to me again. I heard you. Through the wall. With him. The facade cracked then, her composure crumbling as she realized there was no plausible denial. It's not what you think, she began, the most cliched response possible. Then what is it? I asked, surprising myself with how calm I sounded when inside I was fracturing. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is sleeping with the neighbor while I sit home alone, believing she's at work. It just happened, she said, tears forming in her eyes. We met in the elevator a few weeks after moving in, started talking. One thing led to another. How long? She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Nearly the entire time we'd lived here. The apartment she'd been so eager to move into, so excited about. Had she known he lived here? Had that been the point all along? Did you choose this apartment because of him? I asked, needing to understand the scope of the deception. No, she said quickly, looking up. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't know him before we moved in. It was just coincidence. Coincidence. As if that made it better somehow. As if random chance absolved her of the choices she'd made. Does he know about me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Yes, he knows I'm married. And he doesn't care. It's complicated, she whispered. It's really not, I replied, a bitter laugh escaping me. You're cheating on me with the man who lives literally on the other side of our bedroom wall. That's not complicated. That's cruel. She moved toward me, reaching out. Eric, please. We need to talk about this. I made a mistake. A mistake. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. This was a choice, a series of choices. Every time you texted that you were working late. Every time you walked through his door instead of ours. Every time you came home and lied to my face. I grabbed my keys and wallet from the counter. Where are you going? She asked, panic edging into her voice. Out, I said simply. Don't wait up. I spent that night at my brother Tom's apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from our marriage, searching for signs I'd missed, clues that might have prepared me for this revelation. The next morning, I returned to our apartment while Melissa was at work. Her real workplace, I assumed, though I no longer knew what to believe. I packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a week and left a note saying I needed time to think. As I waited for the elevator, the neighbor's door opened. He stepped out, then froze when he saw me standing there with my suitcase. You must be Eric, he said, his discomfort evident. I'm James. I stared at him, taking in his expensive watch, his carefully styled hair, the confidence that seemed to radiate from him. So, this was the man my wife had chosen over me. I know who you are, I replied, my voice cold. He had the decency to look ashamed. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Is it worth anything? I asked. Does your apology change what you did? Does it make you any less the kind of man who sleeps with another man's wife? The elevator arrived, its cheerful ding incongruous with the moment. I stepped inside without waiting for his response, watching his uncomfortable expression as the doors closed between us. In the weeks that followed, Melissa and I existed in a painful limbo. I stayed with Tom, returning to the apartment only when I knew she wouldn't be there to collect more of my things. She called, texted, emailed, pleading for a chance to explain, to talk, to make amends. I maintained minimal contact, unable to face her, unwilling to make decisions while the wound was still so raw. Eventually, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, where the ambient noise would force us to keep our voices down, prevent the conversation from becoming a scene. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug. She looked different somehow, smaller, less certain. The Melissa I'd known had always filled a room with her confidence. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat down across from her. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. "I've ended it with James," she said after a moment. "Completely. I've asked for a transfer to our Boston office." "Okay. I know that doesn't fix anything," she continued. "I know I've broken something precious between us." "Why, Melissa?" I finally asked. Was it just excitement? Something new? She considered the question carefully. Partly, yes. But it was more than that. Somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. Really seeing each other. We became comfortable, predictable. I felt invisible. So you made sure I could hear you through the wall. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. She flinched. "I never thought you'd be home. You were always working late on your projects. I was careless, stupid." "You were cruel," I corrected, "whether you meant to be or not." She looked down at her coffee. "Yes, I was cruel, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." We sat in silence for a long moment, the sounds of the coffee shop, steaming milk, quiet conversations, the clink of cups washing over us. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I finally said. "Trust isn't just about believing you won't cheat. It's about believing in the story we're telling together." "I know," she whispered, "but I want to try, to rebuild that trust, to find our way back to each other, if you're willing." Was I willing? I looked at her, this woman I had loved for so long, this woman who had hurt me so deeply. The answer wasn't simple. "I can't promise anything," I said honestly, "but I'm willing to try, to talk, to see if there's anything left worth saving." She nodded, relief and sadness mingling in her eyes. "That's all I can ask for." As we left the coffee shop, walking side by side but not touching, I realized that whatever happened next would require a kind of attention I hadn't given our relationship in years. A willingness to look closely, to listen deeply, to feel fully. Whether we found our way back to each other or parted for good, I knew one thing for certain. I would never again live with walls so thin they revealed truths I wasn't prepared to hear, yet so thick they had hidden what I should have seen all along. If this story touched you, leave a like to show your support and subscribe for more whispered tales of heartbreak and hope.